People will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel.
Rainy day, cozy day, a day where you just snuggle up in your blanket. The gray billow above drops its product and shudders the sun. One of the things I do when it rains is watch films and movies. Lots and lots of movies and films. I'm struck by their similarity. After many hours of research, I discovered that there are 7 main archetypes. By watching this film, you should have a more mindful, a more mature mind to categorize and break down your favorite movies. And when you're done, tell me. I'll be waiting. Now pop some popcorn and drink some tea and come with me. Hello, friends. Welcome to Films and Storytelling. There are 7 main archetypes when it comes to movies. 7 human archetypal plots, which make up 99% of all movies and films and stories. These are overcoming the monster, rags to riches, the quest, tragedy, comedy, voyage and return, and rebirth. The protagonist sets out to defend against an antagonistic force, often evil. This is a threat. The protagonist and or the protagonist homeland. Some famous overcoming the monster stories would be Jaws, Star Wars: A New Hope, War of the Worlds, Dracula. M. Night Shyamalan's thriller by the name of Signs follows a family of 3, a widow, a former man of the cloth, who has grown disbelief by God because of the tragic death of his wife. Mel Gibson's character in fact, he hates God in the movie. And they go out. The movie drops them in the middle of the strange phenomenon known as crop circle, where a symbol is carved into their field by a questionable source. Now, the monster comes at them in the night as they are all eating their last dinner, their last supper. We don't get a picture of what this monster looks like until the very, very end. We get hints of it as it goes through the story. Ultimately, they defeat the monster, overcoming their fears and becoming a better person through the triumph of the evasion and defeating of these alien species. A classic overcoming the monster story. The Rag to Riches story follows a poor protagonist acquires power, wealth, and or a mate, loses it all, and then gains it back, growing as a person. Some world-famous rags to riches stories. We Americans love these stories because it really shows the dream to be your own person in these special stories. Some famous rags to riches stories would include Cinderella, Aladdin, and the new Willy Wonka. Hugo, which is a movie that follows a young orphan child who finds that his father has died, and he is taken under the drunk apprenticeship of a clock keeper for a train station in France, Paris. And he finds a old weathered man that he tries to steal from. And this man is a toy maker and tinkerer. You find later that his story is that he used to be a filmmaker and lost it all. The story conveys a rebirth and also a rags to riches, that Hugo is no longer an orphan in a corner of a enormous train station, but he's now become a part of a family. And Jean Housset, he is also, from the lost films that he was forced to sell for chemicals, is now honored as a prestigious position for his art. Hugo, it's actually a really sweet movie. I really ask that you should watch. The quest. The protagonist and companion set out to attain an important object and or get to a location. They faced tribulations and other obstacles along the way. Some famous quest movies that we all know and love would obviously be The Lord of the Rings, Jumanji, Pilgrim's Progress, and Journeys of the Lost Ark. It engages us to find that hidden thing or that stolen object, while all pulling together to go behind some project or find some clue. As for the movie Twister, this movie follows a gaggle of scientists and photographers who all come together to study tornadoes and their happenings. At this time, where the movie is taking place, the tornado system is not good enough to get people to safety. They're hoping to triple the amount of time people have to find safety by putting an object that they call Dorothy, which is a sealed capsule that opens to release thousands of mathematical sensors that give back data to the receiver of said things. And they receive obstacles along the way to achieve this goal, including to achieve this goal. For one big obstacle is the tornadoes themselves. This is Twister. The tragedy is much more melancholy. The protagonist unfortunately falls in an irrespectable means of lapse of judgment, which causes their ultimate demise, evoking pity in their folly and fall from a fundamentally good character. These tragedies are also called horror films. A famous tragedy that we all know is William Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet. 7 is a police thriller, or the movie 7 catalogs a sadistic killer who kills according to the 7 deadly sins. Follows a sadistic killer who kills according to the 7 deadly sins: greed, pride, gluttony, sloth, lust, envy, wrath, and strife. Wrath and lust. And is ultimately killed, as these 2 New York police officers follow him to his end, which leaves a tragic ending for the officer involved by death by cop for the murderer, who is the last 2, wrath and envy. This is a really hard movie to swallow, but the lapse in judgment would be the police officer who struggles with the wrath, which is ultimately his undoing, and the winning of the murderer and his horrific prophecy on New York culture as we allow sins around us to occur. This one is really hard. I don't really suggest it. I can only stomach it once a year, maybe even 2 years. It's pretty bad. So just a fair warning. As we go into the laughable twin of tragedy, comedy. Comedy is much more than just humor. It refers to a pattern where the conflict becomes more and more confusing, but is made at last is made plain in a single clarifying event. A happy conclusion. Some famous comedies would be Nacho Libre, School of Rock, Elf, Jojo Rabbit. These stories aren't specifically need to be humorous though. It's a confusing event that is made plain in the end, which the audience kind of already was in on the ending before it happens. And those movies also fall under romances too. Romances can also fall under comedies because we all know that Mr. Darcy and Jane are going to get married in the end. Jane? That's wrong. I forget her name. But we all know that she's going to get married in the end to him. But the events that lead up to that just get increasingly confusing. Does that make sense? So that's kind of what I did Annie. Annie is like the most comical one I have because it gets more and more ridiculous as it goes on, but is made plain in the end as it's clarified in one scene, in the ending scene, and even the romance between the two, the boss and the coworker. Voyage and Return. The protagonist goes to a strange land, and after overcoming the opposition or learning important lesson it acquires to that location, returns with experience. Famous Voyage and Return stories would be The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, Peter Pan, and Gone with the Wind. A shack, I would call. A shack is a movie about a disenchanted man who has struggled from the woes of his daughter tragically being taken. When he is called to the same place where she was taken by a mysterious letter by the anonymous Papa, which is a word they use for God, he goes there and finds a distant land where he learns lessons and faces fears and comes back to his family with that experience. Now, question. What is the difference between these two? For they both go on a journey, and they both come back and achieve their goal. How do they? Aren't they just the same thing? Well, here's where you're wrong. Did Alice in Wonderland fall down the rabbit hole incidentally? coming to a strange world and accidentally finding some kind of force that teaches her a lesson and she leaves with experience? Or did Frodo accept the challenge to destroy the Ring of Power at Mount Doom, opposing obstacles in his way and companions? That's the difference. Now, with the story behind me, is that a quest? No, because Mac was never intending to heal from the wounds that were afflicted that one day. So I would think, this movie, The Shack, definitely comes under Voyage and Return. Now, finally, this one is Rebirth. An event forces the protagonist to change their ways and then becomes a better person. Change its ways or change its ways that it was taught. Some famous ones would be some famous childhood favorites like Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol, Beauty and the Beast, these stories are very prevalent in the character changing from a grumpy old Scrooge to a happy person. It also changes in ways that the character is not just becomes a better person, but he physically changes, like in The Beast of Beauty and the Beast. The new DreamWorks movie, A Wild Robot, is that she finds a maternal side to her that changes her from the regimented, almost maternal or regimented programming that she was given as a child, as her nature was to do. It's a very lovely story. It talks about growing up as Bright Bill as he grows up to be a esteemed Gosling, and think from a tricksy foxy con artist to a trustworthy friend. And Roz, from the programmed robot that she became broken from, into the maternal wild one that we see her today. We love these stories, are very special to our hearts as child because they're simple morals of the story that can be put on easy for a child to understand. Cars is another one. That's a rebirth story. Cars, Mick McQueen becomes, from the horrible person that he is, the cocky rookie, to a likable person. One more thing you may have noticed. Stories can be fitted around to fit more than one category. Multiple of the points, one story can have multiple of these. For example, the movie Tangled has elements of rags to riches, rebirth, and comedy, overcoming the monster. Similarly, Fiddler on the Roof. But in general, if a story can fit one or more of these categories, they still fall under them. It's a fundamental principle. It's a fundamental principle of each storytelling that you will tell and that you'll tell other people.